All right. Well, welcome the few of you that are joining us live tonight. And as always, I'll record these and I'll share them with some others, and we'll probably have a few more jump on during the course of the conversation. But of course, I'm Don Armstrong, Director of Student Media at ETSU, and I'd like to welcome Dave Ongie, the I started to call you the managing editor. Is that correct, or did I get that wrong?
I'll take that. Yeah, news. I call myself. They let me pick my title, and I wasn't smart enough to pick managing editor, which is actually pretty much what I do. But I went with news editor, and that's
News
what I'm
editor
stuck with now.
of the News and Neighbor, and I am going to just kind of kick it off to Dave, and we'll let him tell you a little bit about himself. We'll talk some about the journey that brought him to the position that he is in now. Probably can tell you a little bit about the News and Neighbor as well, for some of you who may not be familiar with it. And then I'll ask some questions, and we can all open it up for some questions, and we'll just have our usual Media Monday conversation. So welcome, Dave. I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I appreciate it. I told Don going into this that I'm definitely not a lecturer, so you're not going to get a lecture tonight. I want as much Q&A as possible, and so I can kind of answer whatever you all are wanting to know and wanting to ask. I was in your shoes back in 2005. I'm a graduate of ETSU from back then, and was lucky enough to go straight into the world of newspapers at the Johnson City Press. I went in as a sports writer there, made the jump to the Kingsport Times News, back to the Johnson City Press. John Molly has the distinction of hiring me twice, and was a great boss both times. Then I decided I wanted to kind of branch out and do more. So I made the move over to the News and Neighbor, which is a weekly paper in Johnson City. It's a free paper, but I get a chance to write about a lot more stuff, just whatever's going on in the community. And it's been a wonderful switch of gears for me. First of all, it gets me in the day shift. I'm getting to be an older guy, and I got a family and all that. So a little more 9 to 5 is much appreciated after working to midnight and after as a sports writer for all those years. So I'm here to answer any questions that you all have, give any advice that would be useful to you all. Things have changed a lot while I've been in journalism. It's amazing. 2005, when I started, I used to leave the office with a notepad and a pen, and that was it. Digital voice recorder. I just upgraded when I got hired at the Johnson City Press in 2005. I just upgraded from the one that had an actual cassette tape in it. And that's all I took with me. When I was done at the Johnson City Press, I was leaving the office with a camera because there were no photographers. So I had to take my own pictures. I had an iPad that I could write my story on. Just a ton of technology, a ton of change. But there are some things in journalism that have remained universal. And I'm sure we'll get into that as we go.
Yeah. And I mentioned this before I launched it. And I always end up talking to all of our guests on Media Monday about this because it's impacted us all. But could you take us through a little bit about how COVID-19 has impacted the work at the News and Neighbor, and you in particular?
Yeah, it's really, we were talking kind of before we went on, and it's amazing what it did at the outset. Back when I was at the Johnson City Press and the Times News, we always had AP wire copy to fall back on. We belonged to the AP, so you could fill the paper with AP copy when you didn't have anything else. At the News and Neighbor, we rely really heavily on community contributions, people sending in photos and stories and press releases and stuff like that, along with what I write. And all of a sudden, overnight, we quit getting anything contributed to the paper because of the fact that nothing was going on. All it was COVID. And we had a very scary stretch there where I'm trying to think, what am I going to put in the paper? At this point, we have all these pages we have to fill and there's nothing being contributed. So we had to get really, really creative. We had to think of kind of different features and different things we could do, and we could reach out to people and run stuff that was more looking backward, historical type stuff, since there was nothing happening in the present. And we wound up getting through it, but it really was kind of a MacGyver situation where you had to problem solve your way out of it and think, okay, what can we do now that the world and everything we're used to covering has come to a stop? It was kind of scary, but at the same time, it was really fun to be able to get outside the box and, just write some different stuff than what we've been writing normally.
And excuse me. And while you're producing the work for the News and Neighbor, just to kind of talk about it just a little bit more, it's a weekly publication. Is that correct? And,
it is.
And about how many households does that go to?
We are just north of 30,000, and it is just Johnson City and Washington County, but not even all of Washington County. So it's really hyper local, and it has been since the beginning. And it's been a trend that I've noticed in journalism in my time there. As the internet has become more prevalent, and not only that, smartphones was really when those came along. People can know things instantly. There's not as much that you can report that people don't know. When they pick up the paper the next day, a lot of times is ancient history. So, what's happened is the one thing that you don't have to compete over as much is hyper local coverage. I've noticed a lot of news outlets are going toward that because what you have in your own backyard, you're not competing with as many other different technologies and news agencies to get that stuff. So they were kind of ahead of their time to be so centered on one community in Johnson City and Jonesboro primarily. And it's been an interesting switch for me. Went from where I was covering sports at the Times News. I'd be in Coburn, Virginia one day. I'd be down in Churchill, Tennessee the next. And to be focused on one small area the way that we are, it's kind of been different. And you think, well, you're going to run out of stories, but honestly, there's just so much interesting stuff happening in your backyard. There's always kind of something to write about.
Yeah, and early on in the pandemic, I know Joe Vento from the Johnson City Press.
Yep.
I had him on for a Media Monday, and I asked that very question. I said, "Has it been tougher coming up with articles, especially related to athletics, since this started?" And he said, "No, it's been the opposite." He said, "We have so much, and it just kind of opened up. I think the way of thinking of the way that you go about covering things. Maybe it wasn't covering games day to day, but there were still tons of stories to be told." And so.
Yeah,
have you encountered that as well?
Yeah, that was definitely the case. And what's funny about it is I know Bud on the Morning Monster. If any of you listen to WXSM, him and Bobby Rader have been on hosting the Morning Monster. They're 5 days a week, 3-4 hours in the mornings. And all of a sudden there's no games being played. And I remember everybody was wondering, what are you going to talk about? How on earth can you have a sports show where there's no games happening? But they got through, and really a lot of it was more compelling. In times like this, and it has certainly been a really tragic time. It's been a hard time for a lot of people. I know there's a lot of people who've been out of work, out of jobs. There have been people suffering, sick, dying. And, what's going on with the newspaper in a lot of ways, it obviously pales in comparison. But, when you go through times where there's a struggle like this, and it changes your routine and it gets you out of the box a little bit, sometimes those can be valuable to you professionally, just because of the fact that you're forced to, like I said earlier, problem solve and look for different stories and look for different ideas. And sometimes it can take you out of a rut. You get to where you're writing about the same stuff year after year. All of a sudden you get in a situation where none of that stuff's going on, and you have to reach out. It makes you stretch a little bit as a writer. I think everybody this past year that I've talked to in journalism, and I've got friends still at the daily papers, they all say they think they're better writers now at this point than they were at this point last year, because they had to go look for stories outside the box, outside of their comfort zone. And really that's great advice for anybody who's a writer, who's creative, is to shake it up and make yourself uncomfortable, because it makes you be creative. It makes you grow new skills in some cases. And it makes you kind of do things differently than you did before. That'll make you a stronger journalist or professional coming out of that.
Don, I think you're talking, but we can hear you.
Oh, sorry about that. I had me unmuted, and can you now? Is it okay?
I got you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. That was weird.
I was trying to read your lips. But...
Yeah. So, you're a man of many talents, Dave. But, okay, but anyway, sorry about that. And let me make sure that okay. The just mention one more thing about the News and Neighbor as I was talking silently there. Um, I'm pretty familiar with it, but I'm sure some students on this meeting would not be, and students who will be watching this recording may not be as well. So could you kind of just take us through a day to day, excuse me, like a typical day for you in the with the News and Neighbor, what that's like?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll go and give a little bit of background on that as well. We've been around for over 20 years now. Bill Derby, who's also an ETSU graduate. Him and his wife Judy started this paper back in the late 1990s, and they had been, he worked at the Johnson City Press for a long time and was working up, I think, in North Dakota, and then finally moved back to Johnson City. They wanted to start their own paper, and the premise of the paper is just to report the good news that's going on in the community. So it's very focused on good news. We're big on getting faces in the paper of folks, and just kind of a way to, when something good happens to your neighbor, they win an award, something good happens, you can you can see them in the paper each week, and it's really been successful. And there's sometimes a shortage of good news in the world, and that's been really a thing this past year. We've reported on the COVID stuff and everything, but we've tried to find good news wherever it's at and get it out there because been in such short supply. So I think it's been an interesting year. It's been a challenging year, but it's been nice to kind of fulfill that mission. A typical day for me, like I mentioned, without having AP wire copy at the News and Neighbor, I'm kind of responsible for everything that goes in there. Either I have to hire a freelancer to take photos or write a story, or I got to do it myself. And so a typical day, I mean, what I love about the job is it's never the same 2 weeks in a row because of the fact that you just never know, I don't know next week. We're just finishing up the issue that's coming out this week, but next week I have no idea what stories I'm going to find between now and then. And it's a wonderful surprise, and something always comes up, something that kind of piques my interest and intrigues me. I get to go out and interview interesting people, take photos, and meet folks that I haven't met before. So it's kind of invigorating in that way. Generally, our production schedule, we come out on Wednesday of every week. So we have to be to the printers by Tuesday at 11 o'clock. So I spend pretty much all day Monday getting the stories that I've written and the press releases and the photos and compiling all of that, doing the budget, kind of laying out where everything's going to go. And I send it to our graphics folks and they print it, from there. Then I pretty much go out back again and gather news from Tuesday afternoon to Friday and even into the weekend. So never the same 2 weeks in a row, just a bunch of different stories. It's really made me a strong feature writer. I really, really enjoyed doing it.
And Dave has mentioned the AP wire a couple of times. If there's some of you may not be familiar with that, AP stands for Associated Press, and basically media outlets subscribe to the Associated Press, and then they're able to pick up articles across the state, across the nation, across the world that the Associated Press covers. But again, it is a subscription based. It costs these media outlets a pretty significant amount of money. And so some do not subscribe to it. Relating it to us locally, the East Tennessean, we don't subscribe to the college AP because we can't afford that. And so anyway, so yeah, it does make it a challenge to, to fill your space with all the local stuff. But that's a good challenge though to meet every week as well. So
yeah, it is, and it makes it more pertinent as well. And it's really enjoyable to do.
Good. I just wanted to make sure. Obviously, you heard me on that one.
I got you.
All right, fantastic.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Just to kind of shift gear a little bit, I know that you've worn a lot of hats in the journalism field. Could you kind of talk about how some of those different experiences in the media profession have helped you and kind of continue to help you in your current position?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's, there's been a lot of change, like I mentioned at the outset, in media as we've gone forward. Back in the financial crisis of 2008, I believe it was, into 2009, there were just a lot of layoffs. I was a sports writer back then, and our department shrunk. We had people in our department that were laid off, and so you start picking up other responsibilities. And kind of in the midst of all that is when social media became a thing. Back before that, I think we all had MySpace pages, but you'd never use those for work. I mean, it wasn't like it is today. Then all of a sudden you're sitting in on meetings, and our sports department, even though we were shorthanded, we were still covering the same amount of space as we were before geographically with less people. We had to figure out all of a sudden, okay, so how are we going to develop a social media presence for our sports department? And at the same time, the folks over in news were figuring out how to develop a social media presence for the Times News as a news department. And that was a real game changer when you look at social media and the responsibilities that were picked up there. Just trying to figure out and trying to walk that balance between, I remember it was a big thing early on. How much do we update people on scores of games? Because back in those days, a lot of people, when they picked up their paper the next day or checked online on your website at night, that was the first time they were finding out scores of games they weren't at, or, if they didn't go to any games, they're getting the scores for the first time then. So we're like, is it going to hurt us if we're given a blow by blow of all these games as they go on? And there was some of that in news too. Do you cover a commission meeting by updating every time somebody says something during the meeting? And of course, you really can't control that because your competitors are going to do it if you don't. So that changes the way that you write, because, people already kind of know the who, what, where, when by the time they pick up the paper the next day. So for me, I try to focus more on the why and the how, and get more, to where you're doing more analysis in the next day's paper in the print edition than you used to. I mean, you used to just do, kind of a play-by-play of what happened. People knew that because people were on Twitter and Facebook as time went on. So it really changed kind of the way we had to write and the way we had to do things. Just that adoption of technology as we went, they got big on us doing video after a while. Once we all had iPhones, that was a game changer because they realized we could shoot video. And as I mentioned, we were shooting photos too. So picking that up, a lot of it's what they call like battlefield promotions, where people would get laid off and you'd have to pick up more responsibilities. But it's all made me a better professional. It's made me more efficient. I've learned a lot of skills I wouldn't have had otherwise. And it was kind of a pain at the time, and we all complained about it when it happened for the first couple of weeks, but you just kind of learn something new and move on. And I really think it's been beneficial.
Yeah, and what you mentioned, and I've been around a while too. How, when you think about how quickly the just the profession has shifted, like just in the last, I don't know, decade, 15 years, really even 5 years, and it continues to shift, and who knows what's next in the industry, because it changes so rapidly. How has kind of having that sense or that spirit of flexibility, how has that helped you in the profession?
I've really tried to stay flexible, and it just kind of, it results in a little bit more work. But when it came time for me to switch gears and try something different and try to get out of sports and move over to news, the fact that I had a lot of experience in a lot of areas really played in my favor and really helped me when I went in for that interview, because anything they asked me, I could draw upon a lot of different things. And I was walking into a job where, we're a very small family-owned company. So, the fact that I could take pictures and do video and do everything, I could file from wherever I was at with my iPad and kind of had all those skills. It kind of made me a little more marketable, and that was really good. I think just looking back a little bit on this race to be fast, and I think that's something that I've really noticed. I think if you're coming into it now, it's just kind of matter of fact. If you're going to be first, if you're going to break a story, you have to be really quick to do it nowadays. It's hard to do. But the one thing I still try to live by, and I would advise everybody, it's never been easier for people to get their opinion out there or to be published, through social media. People have their own blogs. People have, a way to get their information out there. There's an overload of information. For you to be marketable and for you to be considered a good professional as a journalist, you got to realize that credibility is really your only currency that you have. If you're not credible, it doesn't matter if you're first. If somebody gets the idea that they can't trust your information, it's going to be kind of a really hard way to try to make a living. And it's hard in this environment. And I know you all coming in right now, there's a lot of pressure to be fast, and you just got to be sure that you're right when you put information out.
Yeah, I say all the time, credibility is easy to lose, but it's a tough one to gain. And so, and
Yeah.
that's really all we have in this profession. Um, Well, I know I've already been talking a lot, and I can ask many more questions because that's kind of what I do. But I'm gonna I'm gonna pause here for a second and see if we might have some other questions, and you can just unmute and ask, or you can put them in the chat, whatever. All right, go ahead, Kate. I know you're gonna ask one.
Hi.
Hey,
So I know you said that there are a lot of stories that you're getting to write with the News and Neighbor that you didn't get to write while you were at the press. Do you have, just as a fellow lover of feature writing, what are some of your favorite stories that you've gotten to write?
And
Ooh,
quickly,
that's a
before we
really
answer
good
that, I'll
question.
point out that Kate is the executive editor of the East Tennessean. I should have said that. So
Fantastic. Well, I'm a veteran of the East Tennessean. I covered some ETSU basketball from them. I guess for them, I'm away out. I think it was my last year in the school. I kind of finally got involved in that and really enjoyed my time there. My favorite feature stories, I'll tell you the one that comes to mind first. It was when I was still a sports writer. I went to Bristol Dragway to interview a guy named Benny the Bomb. And the thing about Benny, what he did for a living, he was a stunt man, and he somehow picked up the idea to start this stunt where he would put himself in a car and he would rig it with explosives and he would literally blow himself up. And he would have 15 seconds to get out of that car before things got really dangerous. And he would travel to racetracks and dragways and county fairs around the country and do this. And when I heard about that, my first thought was, I've got to go talk to this guy. And I came up upon, they drove me out there in a golf cart to the very back corner of the property at Bristol Dragway. And it was Wes Ramey, who works with Dollywood now, who gave me the ride back there and said, you just have to meet this guy. And when I found him back there, he was mixing up gasoline and whipped cream. And I asked him, I said, or coffee creamer is what it was, not whipped cream. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, well, it makes the explosion bigger if you mix it with the coffee creamer, because there was some sort of accelerant in there. So, but I talked to him and he had been all around the world, and it was just fascinating to learn about that man's life and kind of what was going through his head and his motivation for it and everything. It was just really one of my favorite people I ever got to meet.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Dave, kind of on that same track, and pardon the no pun intended. Can you think of an instance, or maybe more than once, where you weren't necessarily looking for a particular story and it just kind of happened? I mean, maybe you're looking for a different angle and something like totally unexpected, like happens in this business a lot. Can you think of a couple of like one example or even more?
I can think of one off the top of my head. And I was going to interview this this lady who lives in Johnson City. And this was within the last, gosh, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months ago. But she had been the longest serving stewardess of anybody in the world, I believe, or at least in the United States. She had been serving as a stewardess since they first started allowing women to be stewardesses on airplanes back with Pan Am years and years ago. But she's still working and has been grounded for a long period of time. So I went to talk to her about what that's like. You know, she's been flying her whole life, and this is her longest stretch that she's ever gone, you know, in 50, 60 years of doing this, of having her feet on the ground for this long of a period of time. So I went to do a feature on her, and it wound up being a decent little feature. But she said, you really need to come back and talk to my husband. And I said, oh, okay. You know, and people always want me to write features about family members, and they usually don't turn out as good as the original feature. So I was a little skeptical about it. And she said, he's a pianist. He's 91 years old. You just really need to hear his story. So I go back and I talked to her husband, and sure enough, this guy was living in abject poverty as a young man in Haiti when he was a boy. And he wanted to be a piano player from the day he was born. He drew out the piano keys on his porch steps. And he told me, he said, I was born a musician and I just had music welling up inside of me. And I had to get it out, even if other people couldn't hear it. So he would go bang on the porch step and just get the music out, you know, and he's been that way his whole life. You know, he finally got a piano in the house, learned how to play, and through a bunch of different events was able to secure himself of East City, the United States, and made a living as a pianist. Just a fascinating man, unbelievable. And he was literally sitting in the next room while I was doing another feature story. And then lo and behold, he had a really good story to tell.
Well, that's really cool. So, and Dave didn't prepare that, and he wasn't, it sounded like you're all set for that question. He didn't know what I was going to ask. So.
I'm glad I thought of one.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Just to kind of move a little bit to a different topic, I wanted to talk some about swapping stories with Dave Ongie, and
Yes.
you can kind of tell us what that is, first of all, and how that came about, and kind of how it's going, and just talk about it in general.
Well, I'll say beforehand, there was no payola here. I didn't give you any money to plug my podcast, but I do appreciate it. Swapping stories. It's, I got into listening to podcasts back when I was a sports writer, and I finally got tired. I think I listened to all the music there was to listen to. I used to drive, 2-3 hours to go cover stuff, and then 2-3 hours back to write the story. And I went through all the music I had, and I finally found out about podcasts on my iPhone, and I started downloading and listening to those while I was traveling. And I've been fascinated with radio since I was young. I didn't get into it as a career, but I've always loved radio, particularly people who interview, also late night talk shows, David Letterman, and those guys, and just the good interviewers. And I've always kind of wanted to do one. And finally, during the pandemic, which everybody started something new during the pandemic, and I kind of joined that party. But I wanted to do a regional podcast. And it's basically the thing that impresses me so much about this part of the country. And I'm not originally from here, but I moved down at a young age. Everybody here has a story to tell. Most of what I did when I was traveling to cover things, when I was a sports writer, you end up having to wait for a game to start, or there's a rain delay, and you sit around with other sports writers or other people, and you just trade stories back and forth. And it always fascinated me, the stories people had to tell. And almost everybody had one. I've never run across anybody in this region that doesn't have a good story to tell. So I kind of figured, well, if I'm starting a podcast, I need to do one where I get people on and just have them tell their stories, because most of it's fascinating, and I get to tell a few of my own. We go back and forth, and it's really been a lot of fun. We're 8 episodes in. Episode 9 comes out next week. It'll be Andy Ross, who writes in The Loafer. If any of you pick up The Loafer around campus, you've probably laughed a few times at Andy Ross. He's a really funny columnist. That's been one of my favorite papers for a long time anyway. So it was good to get to visit with him. But I've had a lot of former journalists and current journalists on there. So you might, if you listen to the show, you might pick up a few things, some good advice along the way.
And if someone wanted to listen to Swapping Stories, how would they do so?
See, I'm bad at plugging stuff. I'm not good at this. You can go to Swapping Stories, and that's swapping without the G. So we got real folksy with it. Swappingstories.com. Or you can go through the iPhone app, and you can subscribe to it on there, and they'll show up on your phone. But it's been a blast to do, and I think it comes across. And that's all credit to the guests. I've had some really great guests, and I've just tried to tee them up and let them tell good stories, and it's been good so far.
And you said you're like 8-9 episodes in. What have you learned so far? I mean, this is kind of, I've done a few of these now. I don't know, for the last couple of semesters, I don't know, probably 10, 15, but some of the sort of journalism stuff, you can still do. I mean, some of it is fairly universal, but some of it's not, and so what have you encountered as far as in other words, what's the learning curve been with it?
I walked in here and I was so smug. I said, man, I've been interviewing people for 15 years. You just go walk in here and interview people. Then you find out that it is a whole different set of muscles. It's like back when Michael Jordan played basketball and then he went to play baseball, he had to train differently. And then back to basketball, it took him a while to be a basketball player again. Even though you're very physically fit, it's a different set of muscles. That has surprised me a great deal. I would interview people when I interview people for stories. Obviously you can kind of slowly and subtly lead them down a path, and you're not going to use that stuff. You just know it's going to sit there in the voice recorder, and you're going to go get the quotes where you get. But the problem with me was I was doing these shows, and it was taking me too long to get to, get to the punchline or get to the good story. And there was just a lot of stuff in there that my editor was telling me, man, I'm just throwing a lot of this out. And I had to really learn it's a whole different skill set. And I really admire people who interview and do it well and do it for a living. But I think I'm getting better every time I go. And it's, I think, really helping me with the newspaper stuff too, because I'm thinking of lines of questioning differently. And when you interview people more often, it's like anything else. It's like getting reps in. If you get more reps in, you're going to end up being better at something. So the fact that I'm interviewing more kind of gets me better answers for the stories I'm doing for the paper as well. So it's been a lot of fun, but this learning curve has been really, really steep.
And I remember I'm a frequent listener to it. I really enjoy it. Just, I don't know, just hearing the outlandish, some of these stories are just, and these are, these are local folks. I mean, and it's just amazing how much you can learn just, from, listening to local people. Again, as you said, many of them work in the industry, and it's fascinating to hear their encounters during their lives. But what I wanted to ask, kind of what gave you the idea for that? I remember when you first started it, you said that you'd been planning it for a while or wanted to do it for a while. Like, how long had that been cooking?
Yeah, it honestly 18 months, and people don't believe that, but I kept thinking, before I go in, I've got to have a hook that is something that can be repeatable. That's a big thing with podcasts. I mean, I see a lot of podcasts that go 4 weeks or 5 weeks. And most of the ideas I had, I started thinking about it, and I started thinking about it really seriously about 6 months ago, and really trying to find a good format and a good way to do it. It's easy to go very short because you just run out of stuff in your topic or whatever. You kind of paint yourself into a corner with a format or with a subject matter, and you realize, I've said about all I can say about that. I'm in some trouble. So I really had to think long and hard, and that's really, I came back to the thought of, I was out there for 15 years and I never got tired of hearing stories, and people never ran out of stories. It's something, no matter who you talk to. And I've been really surprised with this show too, is we've had some people that have performed really, really well on the show in terms of numbers who, don't have a television or a radio platform. And you would think, well, this week we might not have as many people listening, but the content they bring is just so good. The stories are so good, and they're so relatable to people that it gets passed around. And those episodes do better than ones where you have maybe a bigger name, quote unquote, guest. But yeah, I mean, it really took me a long time to think through it. And, the graphics work and everything we did, it was just painstakingly done to where we would be able to have a good brand and have good content week after week, hopefully for a long time.
Yeah, and thanks for that. Just to kind of shift the line of question a little bit again. First of all, I always love talking to fellow journalists, those especially print journalists. Those are it's just near and dear to my heart because that's my background. But I just would like you to talk a little bit about. Now, I can tell you when I was growing up, it's not like I ever had the thought, I want to be a journalist when I grow up. I mean, no. And so that's not my path or how it transpired. So what I'm asking, how did you get interested in the profession? What led you into it?
That's, I think there might be a good life lesson in this. I was down the path of becoming a teacher. I was a long way toward my English degree. I was going to be a secondary school teacher. I was going to be a coach. As a matter of fact, for 2 years, I think 2001, 2002, and 2002, 2003, I was a freshman girls basketball coach at Science Hill. And I coached there under the expectation if I start coaching, and I get my degree and I get out, I might be able to catch on to a teaching job at Science Hill, which is where I graduated from. The problem was I went way down the tracks in my education in terms of secondary education degree without really getting to try out teaching and see if that was going to be something I was going to be good at. So the semester before my student teaching was supposed to start, I finally had my first really big chunk of classroom experience, in terms of working with students. Now, the technical stuff, the making the lesson plan, all the stuff you get up until then, I was really good at the technical side of things. When it came time for me to go in the classroom, I had to make a really hard assessment and just say, this is not something I'm going to be successful at long term. And there's a lesson there. I went way too far down the road before really starting to pull teachers aside who were teaching in the school systems and saying, what is this like day to day? What are the skills that you have to have? Can I come by and just observe in your class, or try to, maybe do something earlier on to get some experience? Because, I didn't find out till way too late that I was just not suited for it. It wasn't going to be a good fit career wise. So then I kind of switched over and I went into journalism. It was kind of plan B time in my life at that point, because I've been in school a long time. They ought to name a building after me over there, because I paid a lot of tuition. I was there about 6 years. But so I went over to the communications department, because in terms of plan B, I realized I really like sports and I think I'm a really good writer. I think this is something I can do. The first thing I did when I got over there was I went and found a publication I could write for. I found a magazine back then, it was called Sports Talk, and a guy named Mike Jennings was running it. And I knew Mike a little bit. I said, I'll write for free. I just need to figure out if this is something I'm going to be able to do before I go down another degree path and have to kind of abort mission there at the last minute. So he was kind enough to let me write. And that's, I really enjoyed it. It really was a good fit. And then doors just opened up for me. A lot of help from the faculty there at ETSU, a lot of great instruction, and I've been writing ever since.
Like you started and you never stopped.
Yeah, that is. But the one thing, I guess the lesson out of that, whatever you're thinking of going into, get practical experience. And this is true of whatever portion of the academic journey you're on. At least talk to people that are in it and try to figure out if your skill set meets that. There's a lot of people that are going for journalism degrees that, I know people that get into journalism and then they're working really hard for a long time to get over to public relations because the skill sets are similar, but what you want and what fulfills you as a professional is a little bit different. So be sure to talk to people and be sure that your skills and your desires and your goals as a professional line up with what you're going into.
And I'm glad you mentioned the get the experience thing, because that is
Yeah.
just, I don't know, that's just so important. Yeah. Talking about the profession of journalism, I mean, it's no secret. It can be pretty challenging. I mean, it's tough. I mean, the pay is kind of challenging at times, especially starting out, and you have to have really thick skin because you face a lot of criticism in journalism. So with that, let me kind of ask you, how do you stay motivated, and what are maybe some things that you do to kind of blow off steam, to kind of relieve stress? What do you do to handle all that? Because I know that that's always a reality in journalism.
Yeah, I had a buddy at the Times News back when we were in the sports department. His name is John Morehouse, and John used to refer to it as our vow of poverty, when you go into journalism. And he was exaggerating a little bit. I mean, the pay is not obviously as great as you would like it to be, but it's that way in a lot of fields. I will say, if you're going to be a journalist, it's got to be something you love. I mean, you really, really have to love it. You really have to love that line of work. I think in terms of feedback, one thing I've learned a long time ago, when I first started at the Johnson City Press, I remember I went out and wrote my first story, and it was the Johnson City Cardinals. They were playing baseball, and they sent me out, and I was excited, fresh out of college. And I wrote the story, and I kept waiting the next day. Like, my email address was on there. I'm going to get a ton of email, and I didn't get any. And then I found out that's a good thing, because if you're getting email, you spelled somebody's name wrong, and then grandma and mom and dad and everybody are on your case for that. So that can be really hard. And I will tell you, you cannot live and die by the feedback that you get in your email inbox or on social media. You need to have people in your life, friends that you trust, family members, people that are objective and can tell you the areas where you need to get better, but also praise you when you're doing a good job. And that's something that you're not going to get in your inbox or on social media. And it's important to, have healthy friendships, healthy relationships with people. that you can really trust. The one thing I tell people, my best friends, a lot of them were people that wrote for competing news organizations, or worked at the television station, whatever. And it's still the case. And a lot of them have been on the podcast. Honestly, Casey Marler is a good friend of mine. People that are in the business who are going through it, don't ever put yourself on an island just because somebody works for a competing news organization, because really the bosses all compete, but the people out in the field, those are going to be among your best friends, and they're going through what you're going through. Be sure to praise them for the work they're doing when they're doing good work, and they will do the same for you. And it's just really important. And the people you work with out there in the field will end up being your best friends before it's over with.
That's great advice. And that just actually, I didn't even have this question, but what you were saying there kind of sparked it. When you do make a mistake and it ends up in print or ends up, it's a little easier to fix if it's online, but in print, it's there. And I'm sure that's happened to you. I mean, it happened to me several times through the years.
Yeah.
How do you handle that? I mean, what do you do?
I'll tell you my worst mistake, just for starters, because my worst mistake ever, I was covering a basketball game at Dobyns-Bennett, and it happened to be homecoming at Dobyns-Bennett. And for some reason, the folks in news were really big on us getting the name of the homecoming queen in the story, even though we were there, for the basketball. So I was at halftime, and I'm trying to keep one eye on homecoming, what's going on there, and I'm trying to also do my stats and everything you got to do at halftime to get caught up. And somehow I misheard who won the homecoming queen. And so I put the wrong girl in the paper. Oh, and she's homecoming queen. And, there's probably 2 or 3 paragraphs of it. And boy, I'll tell you, it got lit up the next day. And it is the worst feeling, because everybody in this field, you want to be perfect. You really do. And like I said earlier, your credibility is what you ride on. And if you make mistakes, you feel like, I'm not credible. I'm not good at what I do. But nobody in the world goes through life undefeated. It doesn't matter what your profession is. It's not, and people won't judge you on making honest mistakes. What they're going to judge you on is how you respond to those mistakes. And it's important to do it with humility, to try to do what you can to, first of all, own up to the mistake right away. Tell your boss you made the mistake and say, what can we do? Can we run a correction? Don't try to hide it. Just face it head on. Reach out to the people who complained and just do your best to offer an apology. I always offer an explanation. I always try to go back. And this helps me do a better job the next time as well. And it helps me eliminate mistakes. I always go back and reverse engineer and say, how did this happen? And then I tell the people, whoever, kind of how it happened from my perspective, apologize profusely, and then you move on. But the one thing, and I was bad about this early in my career, it was really hard for me to let go of those. And they start to weigh on you. Not only does it make it more likely you're going to make a mistake next time if you're in that mindset, it's just a miserable way to live. And you just need to know nobody out there, I don't care where they work, they've not gone through life without misspelling a name or mixing up a couple facts here and there. It's just kind of how it happens, and just try to find out what the problem was and do better the next time.
Yeah, very good. Let's see. And of course I have other questions I can ask, but let me pause again and see if we have any other questions that anyone else on the meeting would like to ask. And you can ask, unmute and do it, or you can put it in the chat. And I'll pause a second for an awkward silence.
Silence is bad in radio.
All right. Well, I'll keep it going. Oh, here we go. I don't have a question. Amy says, I do like the way you viewed things. So.
Well, good. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, pretty much where I'm at now, it's always good when you can learn from other people's mistakes. And I've tried to do that as much as possible, but by and large, I've made enough to where, I've made enough mistakes to where I've been a lifelong learner for sure. And that kind of has helped shaped it along the way.
Yeah. And as Dave said, that's kind of just part of it. But you work to keep those to an absolute minimum.
Yes.
And when they happen, you own it and you move on. And the thing about this profession is you don't get a lot of calls or emails or posts on social media telling you, hey, you got everything absolutely correct today. No, you hear from people whenever something was wrong. So,
this is a piece of advice that I would give, and I haven't been doing this lately, but I did it back when I was writing at a daily paper, just because, like I said, I got so bad about just remembering the bad stuff that I made kind of a jar for myself. And when I would get a good email or one of those good comments, and they are few and far between, print them out, put them in a file, or, if they're a small little slip of paper, put them in a jar, put them somewhere where you can reflect back on that and remember the wins as much as you remember the losses, because you're going to win a lot more than you lose in this career, but you can get in a mindset where you only remember what went wrong. And it's very easy for that to happen. And if you can stay out of that spin cycle, that's really the best thing you can do.
And I think what you just said would be a good piece of advice in most careers. And so you definitely have a good philosophy toward it. And you might have answered this before, but I know we talked a lot about it, but like, what's something specifically you do to kind of, if you've had that tough day in journalism, and, and we all have those, no matter what we do for a living, what's some of your stress relievers? What do you do?
Ooh, yeah, it's that I kind of I got excited about something else and didn't answer that one. I just generally feel better if I can exercise on a regular basis. That's been kind of hard during the pandemic, but I'm really trying to do that more. If you're exercising, you're generally, I think, going to feel better, about everything. At least in my experience, I feel better when I'm doing that than when I'm not. But, when there's days when it's just eating at me, I turn to video games big time, because, you can kind of escape a little bit that way. And when you come back, you're probably going to have a little bit better frame of mind. So, but yeah, be sure you have something. And everybody's different. Everybody's got different stress relievers. I was doing a story on a Vietnam veteran this week, and for him, it's his Harley Davidson. He said, some people golf, some people fish. He said, I ride the Harley. It makes me feel like a kid. He just gets out there and he rides when he's having a rough day. And, whatever it is for you, identify what it is and be sure that you have something you can do after tough days at work. I know people who were covering the pandemic really heavily, a couple of news organizations, and there are people who are good friends of mine, and they really struggled, back when they were doing the daily numbers, and it was their job to chart it. It was their job to put it into context for everybody. And that's what they did day in and day out, 5 days a week, sometimes 6 days a week for some of these folks. And it really weighed on them heavy. And if you get yourself in a situation like that ever, you have to remind yourself, I need a stress reliever. I need a way to get away from this.
Let's see. And so we got about 10 minutes left. So I always have to ask this question. So I better do it now in case we would run out of time. But if you had to give like just one overall piece of advice, and we can actually talk about it more than just one if it comes to it, for tomorrow's professionals, you can think of it as tomorrow's media professionals, or just a professional in general, because I know a lot of people directly on this meeting, probably will go to a different pursuit than the media. But what's some advice or a good piece of advice you would give?
The one thing I would say to anybody is, when the time comes for you to go out and look for a job, it's show, don't tell. You're going to have to be able to show it, and you're going to have to be able to show people that are making hiring decisions that you're going to be dependable, that you're somebody who can be counted on to hit the deadlines. Almost any line of work, there's very few I can think of where you're not in some sort of deadline driven environment. And this really surprised me when I finally got to sit in on some hiring decisions, as I moved on in my career, and I was working with a sports editor who would kind of consult us as a sports team. We're bringing somebody in. When I was in school, I used to think, I'm going to become such a good writer that they're going to read my stuff, they're going to see my clips, and they're going to go find the worst writer at the paper, and they're going to tell the person to pack their box up and get out of there. We found a really good writer. And that wasn't it. I mean, basically the hiring decisions, it's always who knows of somebody dependable who can write. That's really what shocked me. But it really is such a big thing, because hiring decisions, you invest so much in training. There's so much invested in that the most important thing to people making hiring decisions is that you're going to be dependable. You're going to show up when you're supposed to. You're going to hit your deadlines. Now, you can tell people that you're going to be dependable, but what you need to be thinking about now is, who are the professors that I work with? Do I work at, maybe you work at the East Tennessean and you're filing stories, and then, you have Don to tell people, hey, this person, they can hit their deadlines, they can do their thing, they're going to be successful in a newsroom. If you aren't in a situation where you're in journalism and you can't get a job or an internship or anything in your chosen field, just find the people, the professors, or if you work somewhere in the community, find the people that can vouch for you and the fact that you're going to be dependable and you're going to get the job done. And that's going to take you a long way.
And you just much more eloquently described networking and building portfolio, which is,
Yes.
You just described it in a very practical way. And so that's very much appreciated.
Well, I'll give you an anecdote on that too, which is, I was at ETSU and it was spring semester, my last year there, spring 2005. I graduated, like I said, in August of 2005. I had no idea if anybody was ever going to hire me, what was going to happen. We had a professor come in to teach a sports writing class that semester, and his name's Chris Dortch. And Chris was a guy that really successful in sports writing. He had covered the World Series for Sports Illustrated, done a bunch of stuff, also an ETSU grad. He wanted to give back, so he came to teach a class there. And I saw that as an opportunity. I said, I just really want to impress this guy. I walk in the first day of class and he tells us what not to do as a sports writer. And I realized most of what he said is stuff I was doing, writing for the free paper I was writing for. And I just had to be really humble the moment and say, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. I just need to come in here and learn. I need to work hard. And he's a guy I really, really tried to impress. And as it turned out that summer, Kelly Hodge at the Johnson City Press had an opening all of a sudden in his sports staff. And the first person he called was Chris Dortch, because Chris was his sports editor at the press before he left and went to Chattanooga, and Kelly got the job. And Kelly called him and trusted him and said, is there a name? Do you know of somebody who's going to be dependable? And luckily, when that moment came, my name was the name that Chris told him. And that changed my entire life. I don't know if I have a 16-year career at this point, if it's not for that. I don't know if anybody hires me anywhere, but yeah, it just, like, I wasn't meaning to network. It was kind of an accident, one of those happy accidents Bob Ross talks about, but I networked successfully and I wound up getting hired. And once you're in the door, that's such a huge step.
And one thing I wanted to ask, and this is before we run out of time, and this is a little bit of shifting gears again from the line that we've been talking about, but you've worked for dailies, and you've worked now currently working for a weekly newspaper, and it kind of made me think of the East Tennessee. And now, in normal times, we print twice a week. We haven't been able to do that in the COVID era with all the challenges. But what are some of the similarities or challenges or differences? I mean, how do you compare the two? Like again, from a daily newspaper or one that prints, maybe on a weekly basis.
Yeah, it's there's pros and cons. And it's funny, you kind of remember advice your professors give you. And Chris Dortch was a guy that had a saying that I didn't understand when he said it while I was in his class. He said, I always try to be better than those who are faster and faster than those who are better. So that was his kind of philosophy to writing. But as I've moved to a weekly, I kind of understand more what he's talking about. There's events that I'll cover on a Thursday, like last Thursday, there was an event in the Johnson City Press. I knew it was going to be on their website that night. It was going to be in their paper on Friday morning. I don't go to press till Wednesday. So I need to think of ways creatively to go more in depth or do something that offers more context than you're able to offer when you're writing on a daily basis, because when you're writing daily, you have to get that story, out, and then you're on to something else the next day. Whereas I can kind of think about it for a couple of days, the impact on the community, the impact here or there, and I can maybe call another source and take it in a different direction that has a little more depth to it. So, it's kind of, when you're in a daily paper, you're always winning that speed battle. You're getting the news out really quick. Weekly, I think you really need to dig in and be a little more in depth with it. And I've tried to do that. And it's been just kind of a different skill, and it's taken me a long time to learn it, but I really enjoy writing that way. I really enjoy getting to dig in and get a little more context in there.
And it's kind of come through in a lot of what you talked about today, but just to kind of reiterate, you obviously do a lot of different things at the News and Neighbor, correct? I mean, you're not only managing things from the news side, but you're doing a lot of the writing as well. I mean, in other words, what sort of value do you place on, pardon the cliche, but being able to wear a lot of hats, having a lot of different things that you can do in this business?
It gives you versatility. It's really no secret. There aren't as many jobs out there as there were when I got hired. It's really, I was thinking back, and I started at the Times News, and by the time I left there, and I think in 2015, it had shrunk to, the staff was half the size as it was before that. And 6 months after I left there, they eliminated the sports department altogether and contracted outside. Now the folks at Johnson City, the Johnson City Press, they do the sports for the Times News and for Johnson City, and their staff has shrunk as well. So they're covering from Southwest Virginia all the way to Carter County, and they're doing it with a very, very small staff. So what that means is there aren't as many jobs out there in sports, and that's true of news as well. But if you can be versatile, and if you can get out there and you can get a job somewhere and you have versatility, you can do multiple different things. It just opens up the amount of jobs you can get. You don't necessarily have to work just at a newspaper. I mean, you can switch over and maybe do something in a news department at television, or you can get into radio, or you can do just multiple things. You can do video editing, all sorts of stuff. And the more skills you get, the more marketable you're going to be, and the more opportunities you're going to have. You just don't know which door is going to open for you. That's the one thing. I had no idea if I was even going to get into sports when I first started out, or if I was going to have to go into news somewhere, or just something way out of the box. So, you don't know what door is going to open, but what you want to be sure of is that when that door opens, that you have the skills and you have the experience necessary to walk through it.
All right. Well, that was, and I promised I didn't set Dave up. I mean, that he didn't know what I was going to ask. I mean, that was a really fantastic point and very well said. And again, you've said a lot of things that sometimes I say in the classroom, but you've definitely put a very practical spin on them, and so that's very much appreciated. We're almost at time, but I wanted to encourage everybody again, if you can, give his podcast a listen, Swapping Stories with Dave Ongie, and let's see, iTunes, is that the best place, one of the best places to find it? Or
yeah, a lot of people have the podcast app on their phone, and you can definitely go on there and hit the subscribe button. It'll get you all caught up. So, and the check's in the mail, Don. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem, Dave. All right. Well, Dave, I thank you very much for joining us this evening. And I thank you for what you continue to do on a daily and weekly basis, because things have been challenging for everybody, especially if we've been in this COVID era, and journalists in particular. And so it's very much appreciated. So I really just want to thank everybody for being on the meeting tonight. And again, I'll share the recording so that a lot of others can listen and see this. But again, Dave, thanks very much.
Well, I want to thank everybody for being on, and I hope I said something helpful to somebody out there. And I wish you all the best of luck as you move forward. And, I just remember being at ETSU, and Don's a guy, and I know there's so many people that you deal with, great professors, and you all are really lucky to have the folks there that you have. And I just can't wait to see what you all do moving forward.
All right. And well, with that, I'll give it my sign off of, I'm going to shut up.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll shut up, and I'll see some of you virtually later. Thanks a lot, Dave. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.